Welcome to Sew with Monty. In this section of the casual shirt series, we're going to sew the back to the back yoke. The first thing you want to note with this particular pattern, there is 2 notches up here, and that's to make a pleat. So if you put these 2 notches together and you pin them, and you open it back up and find the center of this fold and press it toward the pin, you're going to create a small box pleat up here. So once I have this pleat pinned 3 ways, first you pin it in half, then push the fold to the center, and then pin it on each side. You want to give it a slight press. Don't press it all the way down the shirt, just at the top edge, because this should be a loose pleat. It's just more for comfort than anything. So I'm just going to press it at this top edge, and then I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stay stitch it in place prior to sewing it to my yoke. So let me stay stitch this, and then I'll bring it back and I'll show you how to attach it to the yoke. So I have my pleat stay stitched down, and I've given it a soft press, not pressing it all the way through the shirt, just at the top. And now it's time to attach it to the rest of the body of my shirt at the yoke line. So I take my pleat, lay the box side on the outside, that becomes my right side, and I want to pin along this back shoulder or back yoke line. So I'm just going to pin it down, making sure that I stay centered here and I don't get my pleat off center. If your pattern has a notch in it, that's really helpful. If not, you may want to fold your back yoke and make a point, a notch, or a little mark so that you know where the center back is. Once I have this pin, I'm going to sew it with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to serge the edge to keep it from raveling, serge them together. Press the seam toward the yoke and do the same edge stitch that I did on the front yoke. So this same edge stitch right here, I'll do that same treatment on the back yoke. So let me go do that, and I'll bring it back over and show you what it looks like. Now I have the yoke and the back attached, and you can see the pleat looks really nice, and I've got my edge stitch right along the seam just like I do on the front yoke. Both seams are pressed into the yoke area. So let's look at it from the inside. So the seam is finished off here, and this is the inside of my pleat, and then the edge stitch is on top there to hold the seam up so it doesn't move around and get twisted. The next step is to put in the sleeves. So let's get a sleeve, and I'll show you how to begin that. I have a sleeve laid out here, and I just want to talk to you about the characteristics of the sleeve. The notch for the center or the front armhole is a single notch right here, and the back notch is a double notch. So when you see a double notch spaced about 3/8 inch apart, you'll know that that's your back armhole, goes to your back armhole, and this is the front. So front sleeve, back sleeve. The third notch you look for is the shoulder seam notch, and that lines up with the shoulder seam notch on your pattern, which in this case is going to be inside our yoke. So we're going to take the body and lay it out. So now the body is laid out so you can see the armhole. Now there's 2 ways of setting a sleeve. You can set it in the manner called open, which is what we're going to do here, or you can do it set in, where you make the side seams closed and you have a hole and you set the sleeve inside there. You sew down the inseam of the sleeve, the side seam, and then you sew into a hole. This one is an open set. It's a little bit easier, and it's done more on a casual type shirt that's not as fitted. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the front, matching our notches here, finding the notch in our yoke and matching it, and then going all the way around to the back and matching the double back notch. But before we do that, we want to put a little ease stitch in here, and I want to take you to the sewing machine and show you a very easy way to do this. So now we're going to put a little ease in this sleeve. Now a lot of times your sleeve will have little dots on your pattern, and they concentrate the ease in one area. I don't do that. I go above my lower notches, my front and back sleeve notch, and start just about 1 inch above either one of those. My setting is on a straight stitch with the long stitch length of 5. Now, once I get this in here, I just want to align my foot to the edge because I don't want to sew right on my seam allowance. I want this to be a narrower width between my seam allowance and the edge, or my stay stitch and my edge, than I would my seam. So I'm lining my foot up here, setting on a single needle centered with a 5 stitch length. And now I'm going to come up here to my tension. This is kind of crazy, and I'm going to crank it up to between 7 and 8. Just the top tension, because that top tension being cranked up there is what's going to give me my ease. And then when I get around, I'm going to take this pin out, I don't need it anymore. When I get to where I'm just about an inch above my other notch, I'm going to stop. Not backing up, didn't back up starting or stopping. Leave a nice long lead string and see what happens. Just by adjusting that tension, I do a natural gather. This can be used anywhere. It can be used when you're doing what we're doing now, if you're trying to gather a puff sleeve in or doing gathering at the midriff line. Now this is more than I need, but I wanted to show you how clever this is just by increasing your tension. Now I'm going to put my tension back where it needs to be, which was on 4. And I'm going to take my hands, because I've got lead strings on both sides, and I'm just going to relax this. Now I didn't have to do it this tight, I just wanted to show you what just increasing your tension will do. So next time you have to set gathering and you don't want to do that, pull the string thing and break the string and so forth and so on, you can do it by tightening your top tension. Now see, now I've got this just cupped in just enough that I can go over there and it'll fit nicely into my open armhole. So let's go back and pin it in and go to the next step. So now I have my sleeve roughly pinned in, and what I've done is I've pinned my notch in the front and my front edge, and then I pinned my back notch and the back edge of my sleeve to my armhole, lined up my notch at my shoulder and pinned it. The rest of this gets filled in after you've pinned everything else. So you just want to go along through here. Now I've noticed I'm putting my pins in perpendicular to the edge. This allows the two curves, the outside curve and the inside curve, to fit more compatible than having it pinned lengthwise this way, because that can hold it and it doesn't let the curves meet up the way they should. So perpendicular pins is preferred, and more pins is better. You don't have to overpin, but I like to put about 7 to 8 pins in here to hold it down so that I don't have to worry about it when I'm sewing. The better you pin, the better your sewing's going to be. And the next step would be to go back to the sewing machine, use our 3 stitch length, 5/8 inch seam allowance, and sew all the way along here. Noting that the 5/8 is going to go just on the other side of this gather line that we made using our tension tightened up. So we'll sew that in, and then afterwards I will take both of these together and serge the edge of them together and press very nicely. So let me get to that point and I'll show you what it looks like. And I just wanted to show you this because I think it's important. I've got my sleeve on the top, and I've also been checking underneath to make sure I don't sew a tuck. Just like when I sewed the collar onto the neckline, you want to keep checking underneath. Make sure your sleeve's on top because it's more susceptible to getting tucks in it than the bottom. If I have to along the way pull on it just a little bit, I will do so. I don't want to stretch it out of shape, but if I have to pull on it to get it taut enough to keep the tucks out, then so be it. And I'm sewing in a 5/8 inch seam allowance with a 3 stitch length. So I'll go ahead and finish this off and then show you the next step. We now have both of our sleeves set in the open sleeve setting method. And the next thing is we need to give this a good press. It's most common that the seam will be pressed into the sleeve cap and not into the body. That being said though, there are times when you can press on an open sleeve like this because it's very loose fitting and the cap is shallow. You can press it toward the body and then put a stitch along the body seam. So it's kind of your call here whether you want it to go into the sleeve or into the body. I'm going to put mine into the sleeve because I'm not going to do that stitch along there. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to press this, but instead of pressing it flat on the ironing board, because it's curved and has shape, I'm going to use a ham. And I'm going to put my hem in like this so that the curve, let me put it in the other way so you can see, so that the curve follows the armhole. And it makes it so much nicer and looks much nicer to press. Now I'm not going to try to press the whole thing at once. I'm just going to go in small areas. So I'll find a curve, the curve part, and I'll fit it over my pressing ham like this. And then I press this section down. And once I have this pressed down, then I simply move my armhole and my sleeve seam so that I can press another section. Now this part's going to go this way, so we're going to press it a little differently. So when I see that curve, I stop pressing. And then we'll go backwards a little bit and get the back part of this cup. So I'm doing the sleeve cap right now, but the underarm section will press a little differently. And you just want to steam it. But see how nice it is to press on a rounded surface instead of flat when you've got a rounded shape. This works great with princess seams as well. And then we can take the pressing ham out and we'll press the underarms flat on the ironing board. And when I do this, I'm not as concerned about the body. I want where the seam is going to go into the sleeve. That's where I want to make sure I'm nice and flat. So I press in here, let this be kind of crunched up a little bit. And then once I have both of them pressed, I can lay it out and take a look at it. So now it's starting to look like a real shirt. We have our sleeves set in the armholes, and everything's lining up beautifully. The collar looks great, and as the lapel does too. One thing we want to do before we go on is we want to take this front edge and start at the corner of the lapel to the corner at the bottom and make sure that these are the same length. And if they are, that's great. If they're not, try to do your adjustments at the hem and not at the collar unless it's very obvious that that's the place that needs to be adjusted. Most of the time, if you've sewn the correct seam allowances, you won't have a problem. But just double check that. Also, now is the time to maybe slip it on whomever you're making it for, yourself or someone else. And just make sure you like the width and the width of the armholes, or the depth of the armholes, because it would be a good place to do any adjustments if you need to do that now. So that's it for this part of the series on the casual shirt. Join me for the next video and we'll sew the side seams and hem the sleeves in the bottom.